Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Doug is deeply deluded, believing himself the puppet master, but the truth is far darker. He and Vanessa are the real victims of Joey's intricate scheme. Joey has orchestrated everything with unnerving precision. Instead of being a target, Vanessa is nothing more than a pawn, totally unaware that her husband's blackmail plot is unraveling in exactly the way Joey intended. Doug's arrogance blinds him. He's convinced his plan to bribe Joey's henchmen to edge him out of the ring is working. He revels in his imaginary moral high ground and power. What he doesn't see is that he's being watched. Every bribe, every decision, every hidden clause in his contracts, all recorded, mapped, manipulated by Joey's surveillance network. Joey knows Doug better than Doug knows himself. When Doug installs clandestine payments to intimidate Joey's associates, he's actually triggering a surveillance trap Joey has laid. Meanwhile, Vanessa believes she's part of a clever duo with Doug. She thinks she's safe. She thinks she has wealth, connections, influence. She doesn't recognize the patterns in the financial ledgers that whisper of Joey's handiwork: small, carefully timed transactions, shell companies with Joey-friendly directors, untraceable wire loops. These are not Vanessa's funds. They belong to Joey, flowing through her bank accounts to launder money to the next layer in his empire. She sees only increasing balances. She thinks it's her success. In reality, it's her undoing. Joey feigns rage when he discovers Doug's bribery, but in truth he's smiling behind the scenes, cutting the listening devices that captured Doug's calls. He's miles ahead. He created that evidence, seeded that strategy, let Doug dive in unsuspecting. When Doug boasts to Vanessa about having proof of Joey's misconduct, Joey's silent laughter echoes through the tape wires. For Doug, the power trip begins to sour, but he doesn't see the precipice. Then comes the phone call to Vanessa. Joey plays the concerned protector, chastising Doug for playing a dirty game he doesn't understand. He says, "Doug, you're messing up. If you go further, she's going to lose everything." Vanessa cringes at the news, but then, as Joey hangs up, he smirks. Every panic-inducing syllable was orchestrated. The downfall begins. Because Vanessa doesn't know it yet, but she's about to be stripped of power, dignity, everything she thought she had. Vanessa bursts into Doug's home office with tears and fury. She accuses him. "What have you done? You dragged us into something bigger than you than us." Doug tries to shield her, lies about control, boasts that he's ready for the final play, but Vanessa's world shatters. She sees his panic. She feels his confusion. She realizes the cash they thought was theirs is not theirs. She has been unwittingly laundering Joey's funds. Her empire? Thin air. She lashes out, not just in vengeance, but in fear. If Joey can manipulate Doug, he can ruin them both. Doug is blindsided. He believed Vanessa was on board, solid partner, support system. Now she's recoiling, accusing him. He had assumed dominance. Instead, Vanessa reminds him how deep the hole is. He pleads, but Vanessa spits out that she's barely keeping her life together. She distrusts every transaction, every word he says. But Joey's hold is deeper. Now both are trapped. Not just by incriminating evidence, a theory beholden to Joey financially, emotionally, psychologically. Joey begins to flip the script, threatening them with exposure unless they comply. He knows Doug's medical license is in jeopardy. A scandal involving finances and blackmail could end his career. Vanessa's bank records are vulnerable to a tax audit, a criminal investigation. Joey doesn't ask for money anymore, demands total silence, obedience. He taunts Doug, "Your hands might be steady, your scalpel precise, but can your mind stay sharp when everything you thought you owned isn't real? When what you built with Vanessa is just smoke?" Doug, who once believed he could outmaneuver anyone, now scrambles. Regret floods him, that he quit the hospital in a display of ego. That he underestimated Joey's intelligence. That he let Vanessa think he had everything under control. Now, Doug can't remember who he was fooling, Vanessa or himself. As Vanessa collapses under the truth, she sees how much of their life was an illusion. Joey manipulated the ledger, the appearance, gave her illusions of growth. Now those illusions crumble. She weeps not for money but for the betrayal, for the love she thought existed with Doug that was built on lies and borrowed cash. She never imagined Joey could build a trap so precise that both she and Doug would fall willingly into it. Inside this tangled emotional cage, Doug and Vanessa become prisoners, slaves to the very man they tried to blackmail. They live in fear, dread phone calls, dread emails. They watch every ticker flash on news about financial investigations. Their names might surface soon. They can't sleep. She despairs at his leadership. He laments his failure. Joey extends his leverage. He offers Doug a deal: use your surgeon's reputation to endorse a charity front, one of his shell organizations. In return, Doug can keep certain assets frozen under Joey's protection. Doug knows this is beyond shame, but the alternative is ruin. Vanessa recoils at the unethical bargain. She tells him, "I won't let you sell out everything we believed in." Not for this. Doug hesitates, torn between saving what little dignity remains or surrendering to Joey's control. Vanessa, emboldened by her fear, confronts Doug. "You had a place. You had honor. I believed in us. You threw that away for a dream that wasn't ours." She's done. She walks out of their shared apartment, dragging a suitcase loaded with documents, ledgers, passports. Doug collapses into regret, but Joey's already won. Vanessa's departure is part of his final move. Doug is left alone, in debt, discredited, cornered. Vanessa leaves the city with minimal dollar cash, no plane ticket, uncertain future, but free from Joey's trap. He watches her go. Joey watches Doug too. Reports back to his inner circle. Doug's crumbled. Vanessa's gone. Their love destroyed. He calls it a victory, allegiance to power maintained. Evidence gathered. Trust shattered. But there's something else brewing. Under the rubble of Doug and Vanessa's ruin, a subtle undercurrent begins to stir. Doug, humbled and broken, hires a private investigator to recover lost records. Vanessa, somewhere far off, begins sharing what she discovered about Joey's laundering. She sends fragments of banking codes and shell names to an investigative journalist under anonymity. The dissolving duo may become weapons in Joey's collapse. At the hospital, Ted receives an encrypted tip, details about funds used in hospital charity events that match shell transactions. He begins to investigate discreetly, suspecting Joey's front might have tried to link into hospital donations. The more he digs, the more suspicious patterns he sees. Soon, this edges back into Madame Vanessa and Doug's fear. Joey's empire may yet collapse under the weight of the very people he hurt. But for now, in this moment of deep unraveling, the true finale looms. The pieces are on the board. The players broken. The trap made visible. The question no longer is who low sits, how far they can remake themselves in the aftermath. The beginning of the end is near. Doug sat alone in the shadowed corner of a rundown motel just outside the city. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint buzz of a flickering overhead light. The once prideful surgeon had disappeared behind his own mistakes. No more tailored suits. No more slick confidence. Only the bitter taste of betrayal and the suffocating weight of failure. He scrolled through messages from an old contact, a private investigator named Hale, who had started feeding him breadcrumbs. Files. Bank statements. Audio snippets. Pieces of something much larger than Doug had initially grasped. Joey hadn't just manipulated him and Vanessa. He had embedded himself into system charities, hospitals, private clinics. Everywhere Doug looked, Joey's name was never on the paper, but his fingerprints were all over the rot. Doug's jaw clenched. What started as an ego-fueled gamble had transformed into survival. He wasn't playing Joey anymore. He was trying to claw his way out of the web before it choked him completely. And Vanessa, she was gone. No number. No word. Not even closure. She had slipped out of the chaos like smoke, leaving behind an empty apartment and a deeper kind of silence than Doug ever expected. He hadn't even realized what she'd become until she wasn't there to shout at him anymore. He checked the USB Hale had mailed him. There were internal records cryptic but damning showing how Joey had funneled funds through Vanessa's accounts using fraudulent investment programs, naming her as a silent partner on over 6 shell companies. All of it designed to collapse at a moment's notice and leave her holding the bag. Doug didn't know if Vanessa had escaped before it all detonated or if she'd simply decided to burn it down herself. He thought about calling Ted. That was the hardest part. Ted had always been a target in Doug's mind, an authority figure to rebel against, a reminder of everything he didn't want to become. But now, Ted was clean, sturdy, untouchable. Doug had mocked that steadiness, but now he envied it. He wondered if Ted had figured out how deep Joey's reach had gone, if he was already working behind the scenes to build a case, or if he had walked away, finally too exhausted to fight anymore. Meanwhile, Joey had gone quiet but not absent. In a private lounge somewhere offshore, Joey sipped whiskey under dim lights, flipping through an encrypted tablet. His face was unreadable, but the calm was dangerous. He had received word from a source inside the States Vanessa had made contact with a journalist. Nothing major yet. Just questions. Hints. A few numbers. But it was enough to make him stir. He didn't care about Doug anymore. That mess had resolved itself. Doug was ruined, irrelevant. But Vanessa still had value. Not because of who she was, but because of what she knew. Joey leaned back in his chair and tapped his fingers against the glass. She was smarter than he gave her credit for. He had underestimated her, thinking she'd stay tethered to Doug until they both sank. But she didn't. She'd run. She'd cut ties. She had fought for survival in a way he hadn't anticipated. That intrigued him and annoyed him. He sent a message. A simple text. No threats. No accusations. Tell your story if you want. Just make sure it's the last one you ever tell. Vanessa received the message while sitting in a rented room in Lisbon, staring out at the water. Her hands were steady. Her heart wasn't. The shadows of her past clung to her like fog. But for the first time, she had a choice. To stay hidden. Or to expose everything. She reached for her phone and called the journalist back. Across the Atlantic, Ted was quietly rebuilding the hospital's image. He'd kept the press away. Cleaned the floorboards of every scandal. But a new whisper had reached him, an anonymous tip about offshore donors linked to Joey's companies. Someone was helping from the inside. He suspected Vanessa, but he didn't say it aloud. He received a package the next day, no return address. Inside, documents. Enough to prove fraud. Enough to build a case. And one simple note written in clean, deliberate cursive. He used us all. I'm just the first to say it out loud. Ted understood what it meant. He began feeding the documents to a trusted federal contact. Quietly. Carefully. No media. No headlines. Just facts. Evidence. The building blocks of a takedown. And Doug? Doug made a decision. He showed up at the hospital unannounced, looking older than anyone remembered. He didn't ask for his job back. He asked to speak with Ted. And when Ted met him in the hallway, Doug handed over everything he had: Hale's files, the USB, the recorded conversations. I was wrong, Doug said. About everything. About Joey. About Vanessa. About you. Ted didn't offer forgiveness. But he accepted the files. They stood there for a long moment. Not as enemies. Not as allies. But as men who had both been used by the same ghost. The investigation moved quickly after that. Joey's aliases were traced through 6 countries. His accounts frozen. Associates interrogated. Vanessa was granted immunity in exchange for full testimony. Doug quietly cooperated from the sidelines. He refused interviews. He disappeared again after it was over. And Joey? One night, as authorities closed in on a private airfield in the Caribbean, he vanished. The plane was found abandoned. The pilot gone. No crash. No signal. No body. Only a note left in the hangar. Every gate can be opened. You just need to know who built the lock. It was signature Joey. Cryptic. Cocky. Uncatchable. But even as he slipped into legend, the damage had been undone. Vanessa opened a small advocacy firm, helping financial fraud victims navigate the system. She didn't talk about Joey. She didn't talk about Doug. But she looked forward. Ted remained at the hospital, steadier than ever. He never spoke publicly about the ordeal. But behind closed doors, he had built something unbreakable. And Doug? No one really knew. Some said he'd left medicine entirely. Others said he volunteered at an unregistered clinic in South America. One rumor claimed he still sent letters to Vanessa and signed. But the truth? Doug had finally learned what it meant to lose everything and to walk away anyway. And in the silence that Joey had once weaponized, the people he tried to destroy rebuilt their lives. Not perfect. Not proud. But real. Months passed. The dust that Joey had kicked into every corner of their lives slowly began to settle. The scandal didn't vanish, it never truly could, but the noise faded, replaced by something more dangerous: silence. The kind that arrives after a storm and leaves survivors questioning whether the sky will ever really stay clear. Vanessa had found a rhythm in Lisbon. Not peace, she wasn't naive enough to believe in that anymore, but stability. Her work helping victims of financial fraud gave her a sense of redemption, even if her own guilt still lingered in the background like smoke she couldn't wash off. She never changed her number, even though she should have. Some part of her wanted to believe that if Doug ever called again, it would be to say he'd forgiven her for being blind, for enabling Joey, for walking away. But the call never came. Instead, it was an encrypted email. No greeting. No signature. Just a sentence. He's alive. And I think he's watching again. Vanessa stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't have to ask who he was. Joey had a way of disappearing without truly leaving. He never lost the waited. That was always his advantage. She deleted the email, but backed it up offline. Back in the States, Ted walked the hospital halls like a man finally free. The new board didn't ask questions. They let him lead because he'd earned their trust in the fire. He didn't wear suits anymore. He didn't check headlines. He poured himself into quiet, consistent work. Healing was slow, but it was happening. Yet he, too, had received something, a flash drive with new files. Joey's reach hadn't ended. He'd left strings tied to medical research donations in several states. Foundations Ted once thought reputable had Joey's money buried under them like landmines. The web was still active, still tangled, and Ted knew, even without a face, Joey was still a threat. So he assembled a team. Quietly. Carefully. A digital forensics expert, a financial analyst, a former federal agent. Not to go public. Not to go to war. But to prepare. Because if Joey returned, it would be through influence, not violence. Through systems, not spectacle. And somewhere, far from the hospitals and offshore accounts, Doug rebuilt himself. He didn't live under his name anymore. He volunteered at a remote health clinic in South America, treating people who had never heard of him, never cared what headlines he'd been part of. He didn't ask for forgiveness anymore. He gave people what he could, his skills, his time, and a quiet version of himself that no longer needed to be right. Still, every month, he wrote a letter to Vanessa. He never signed them. Never sent them. But he kept them, each one folded and tucked into a worn notebook. Sometimes they were just 2 lines. Sometimes 5 pages. He didn't expect her to ever see them. He just needed to remember who he had once loved and who he had become because of her. One of those letters read, "We let silence destroy us. Not Joey. Not the money. Just the things we didn't say. I wonder if we'd survived if we'd just looked at each other sooner and admitted we were scared." Vanessa would have agreed. One night, she returned home to find a small envelope beneath her door. No postage. No markings. Inside was a photo, a surveillance shot from years ago, showing Doug and Vanessa exiting a gala, holding hands, laughing. At the bottom, written in red ink, "You still think you won? Joey. Not dead. Not done." She didn't panic. Not anymore. She called a contact in New York, someone who owed her a favor. The next morning, she booked a flight back to the States. It was time to end it properly. When she landed, she didn't go to Doug. She went straight to Ted. He didn't ask why she came. He only asked what she had. And she had everything. The names of Joey's last active partners. The traces he'd left behind in tech startups and cryptocurrency wallets. Transactions so subtle they were almost clean but not clean enough. She handed it all over. Not for immunity. Not for credit. "I'm done hiding," she told Ted. "He wanted us afraid. I'm done." Together, they launched the final phase. With Vanessa's intel and Ted's team, federal agents moved swiftly. Seizures. Arrests. Asset freezes. Joey's associates were caught mid-transfer. One tried to run. Another flipped immediately. Still no Joey. Until a private jet, registered under a shell name, made an unexpected stop in Morocco. Authorities moved in. Joey wasn't on board. But someone else was a woman. Mid-40s. Disoriented. Unwilling to speak. A fake passport. Eventually, she whispered a name: Joey's. She said he'd left her behind. Back in the States, Ted and Vanessa stood side by side outside the courthouse where the final testimonies were being heard. Doug, flown in quietly, gave a statement behind closed doors. Not to reclaim anything but to finish what they'd started. The world never got Joey's face on a headline. There was no mugshot. No trial. Just a quiet bulletin from Interpol. Subject presumed dead after coastal crash near Mauritania. No body recovered. No one believed it. Not really. But life moved forward anyway. Vanessa reopened her office. Ted returned to his hospital. Doug, somewhere in the Andes, wrote one final letter. This time, he signed it. And mailed it. Vanessa opened it weeks later. Just a simple line, scrawled in honest, imperfect handwriting. "Maybe we weren't built to last. But you made me want to be better. And that has to count for something." She smiled. She didn't write back. But she kept the letter.